So much to traverse in the next little while, but Raj and Patrice, best-selling author, farmer, welcome. Let's give them a big round of applause. I've brought this so I can access your questions too. You can post them on Twitter. Just use the hashtag #integrity20 and I'll pick them up there. Patrice, we've heard from Raj, so let's start with you. Land use. You know, there was a headline this morning that drought may actually make big parts of Australia uninsurable. What are you seeing as the really headline effects of climate change and drought in our own country?
The main thing for me are the last 2 years where droughts really cut tight in most of New South Wales and Queensland has been the fact that the drought and climate change have not really been connected in the narrative, and that agriculture is the third biggest greenhouse gas emitting sector. And 12 years ago I would have thought, we'll have our conversation about electricity, we'll have our conversation about transport, and then we'll get on to agriculture. We've not really ever got there. So it has been very sad, I think, the drought conversation, where we have somehow allowed the grasslands of New South Wales and Queensland to be destroyed or disappeared in the name of maintaining some sort of agricultural future, because to allow this to happen to our soil, our resource, which is a thin soil anyway, coating over our land, has been nothing short of tragic. And really, if we understood agriculture in terms of climate change, it would never be allowed. We would be so ashamed of that happening. We would be regarded as criminals if we allowed that to happen. If I killed you, I'd go to jail, but I can destroy the soil and get drought relief.
Yeah, that is a great image or message that you've sent. Do you think we're connecting them now?
I think it's been very difficult. Our agriculture lives, I feel when you were speaking, Raj, I have definitely not done the most I could have to try and break the patriarchy in Australian agricultural systems, but clearly our agriculture is so embedded in our pioneer history. It is about tough men and women who went out there and against all the odds developed this agricultural sector which we're meant to be proud of today. And those statistics and those wonderful narratives live right next to absolutely damning state of the environment report statistics. Water damage, soil loss, erosion just about everywhere, biodiversity loss, not to mention the impact on the Indigenous communities across the nation. So it's a bad story and a good story, and we've never quite brought them together.
And you talk about the resilience and the tough image of the farmer or the worker in Australia. That's so tied to our country towns and the prospects of our country towns. With your knowledge, are you optimistic in any way about their future? This week, you're asking me at a time where I've just driven from Melbourne down through the Western District, the heartland of great cropping country of the nation, Prime Ministers, to Mount Gambier, through many country towns down there, and it was pretty sad, I thought. It was very sad. And this is an area not in drought, fabulous wheat crops, canola crops, oats, broad beans, all in full flight, lots of fat lambs being fed all across these grasslands, and yet the country towns did not give a vibe of thriving. And the really sad thing was when I'd call in to get a snack, it was pretty sad, frozen quiches, and it was all a bit sad. I'm coming to you shortly, Raj, but you call yourself in your latest book a proud dirt farmer, which I just loved. If you could solve it, or if there was something that really needed to be done immediately, what would it be?
Oh.
Like
the one thing, the food waste factor for me has been just mounting and mounting, because the waste, not just for all farmers in the paddock, but at the retail, and then of course in the domestic. And I think when people tune into this waste, because we live also with this big narrative, we're never going to have enough agriculture to feed the world, which is a lie. I think we will, we just have to do it differently and better. But of course, a good way to start right now is to make a commitment not to waste, and pass comment on it when you see it.
Yeah, make it a topic of discussion.
Yes, when you see it in shops even restaurants. Why are you giving me this serve for 2 people?
Yes.
This sort of thing we should just call it out.
And that's a very practical step too, I guess. Raj, we're talking about drought and climate change. Headlines in Queensland today that we now might face water restrictions. Do we actually have a worldwide shortage of water, or is this a political problem in our governments not being brave enough to talk about desalination and dams and how we use water?
I mean, for me, desalination and dams are cowardly. The braver thing to do is to point out that we are profligate in our water use. Braver would be to point out the water footprint of beef in Australia, for example, which it seems that there's not the political courage to do. But I also I just wanted to engage with you a little bit, Patrice, about your lack of optimism about rural Australia. Because, I mean, one of the consequences of Donald Trump in American politics is that now every political candidate has a rural plan. For the first time in no one knows how long. But there's a vision for the revitalization of rural America, and part of that is about getting more young people back on farms. Because that, unless you have small farms, it doesn't make sense to have small towns. But the constraint that many young people face in getting back on the land is just too damn expensive. And I wonder, I mean, is there, do you not hear from young people who are like, I would love to be a farmer, but it's just not happening?
And there are some good systems here, a group that's got together trying to put together retiring farmers and wannabe farmers who might not have the money or the know-how, sharing implement tools, etc. There's lots of interesting things happening in that space. But, it's not just a farm. You have to want to live in a community. It's not just the agricultural activity. Yeah. It's the isolation. You have to enjoy it. You have to have a long-term commitment to it to make it worthwhile.
Access to education.
I absolutely find now that there's so many young people from our towns just don't want to stay there.
Yeah.
And you can't blame them, really.
Raj, what about the types of food people are demanding? How much is that going to drive the types of food we produce moving forward?
Well, I mean, I think it has a great deal, I mean, to say about what it is that farmers plant in the ground. But it's very interesting that there are some parameters around this that we're allowing ourselves to think through and some that we're not. So, for example, in America right now, there's a big thing called Impossible Meat, which is a soy-based burger that tastes exactly like meat. And one of the big IPOs, the initial public offerings on the New York Stock Exchange was Beyond Meat, which is a sort of unicorn company, multi-billion-dollar company that makes fake meat out of pea protein. And the idea here is that you can change everything, but everything stays the same. That we don't really have to ask why it is that we eat our meals off our laps. We don't have to ask very hard why it is that people who work at fast food restaurants are on the breadline. We don't have to really bother about asking about the poverty wages in the food system. What we can do is just have a slightly smaller carbon footprint, but still have the same burger. And there's quite a lot of money in transforming everything and keeping it the same. And I don't, what I would love to see is the kind of shift towards a diet that embraces the kind of things that come from sustainable organic farms, like eating seasonally and not having blueberries when they're out of season, for instance.
And we'll talk about that a bit more later. But I saw Deloitte saying that by 2030, the plant-based meats will be a $3 billion annual revenue per year. Can you see that growing? Is that the direction we're going in?
I kind of do, because of particularly if at the same time we're seeing moves towards carbon pricing, for example, in agriculture. Beef becomes more expensive, whereas soy burgers continue to taste better, and then that's what it is that people eat.
Yeah, there's an irony in that though too, because while it may be more sustainable, it's more highly processed. And they were saying it's the millennials that are really focused on it. Are there big demographic issues, age issues in our use of food going forward?
I mean, a lot of this is about how much you've been exposed to the standard American diet. And so there are standard American diet, SAD for short in the literature. I'm living this right now. I mean, I hadn't intended to talk about this, but one of the reasons I'm in Brisbane is because my uncle is dying of type 2 diabetes. And Indian bodies and South Asian bodies don't do well with the Western diet. Yes. And so, and everyone in my family now who has been exposed to the Western diet is fracturing because of the first a couple of generations of poverty, and then the overload of calories and the madness that is this diet, and it's breaking us. So yes, there are demographic issues, but it's much more about how it is that we're all exposed to this really toxic environment around food, and that the good alternatives that wouldn't break our bodies are the ones that are speciality or niche crops that you have to go out of your way to be able to be rich, to be able to be healthy.
All right, so we'll come to more of that, unpack that in a moment, but that raises the issue of garlic in a sense. I'm really intrigued how you became a garlic farmer. It's opportunity, it's learning.
I think for many farmers, when they diversify crops on their farm, it happens sort of out of nowhere. It's not necessarily planned, because I met a retired vegetable grower who was mad on garlic and had seen an Italian in a country town in Victoria grow beautiful garlic. I love that garlic. You can't eat it. Can I buy it off you? And he enticed the guy to give up his 13 garlic bulbs so he could grow them out and develop them as a commercial garlic crop. He did that for a few years on a biodynamic farm in Victoria, and then he took the bulbs around to his family and me and said, let's grow garlic. So he was a vegetable grower. He knew a good garlic bulb when he saw one. He took the initiative and just grew it out with time over 7 years and developed the base, and then came and shared it with his family and me and taught me how to grow garlic. Now, what did I know about growing garlic? 4 cloves in the veggie garden was about my limit. I ate it regularly, but that's very different to growing it commercially. But I was advantaged by the knowledge of a very skilled vegetable grower.
Tell us something about garlic we don't know.
There's about 600 kinds. That's one thing. If it's imported, it's been sprayed. In Australia, we're now developing and have available quite a lot of good varieties, but it is the best local antibiotic that you can have, and lots of research papers have reducing blood pressure. So as a medicine, I think it should be promoted, as food, certainly from an Indian tradition about food is your medicine, is something that we're not hooked into. So I eat a lot of garlic.
So that's on one end. The other end is often land use can be subject to a lot of fads. And you told me the story about blueberries. Our blueberry production has actually doubled in the last 5 years.
Yeah, and I talk about Coffs Harbour in New South Wales, used to be bananas, is now blueberries. And there's quite a lot of conflict there they weren't expecting it to be such a boom. They didn't think the nation was going to go nuts over blueberries. Farms are right up against schools, all these ad hoc dams put in, lots of chemicals on berries. And just for the word, for most organic farmers, there are some things we never eat that are conventional, and that's berries and tomatoes. They're the things that we don't like, and I personally only eat organic. Yeah. Okay. And as a consequence, you don't get them all the time.
So, and we'll come back to that, I think, in a moment too, but can I ask you about a couple of ethical issues? And Raj took some time talking about the labour force. And while you and I have talked offline, you've talked about low and uncertain pay here in Australia, high-risk work, exposure to pesticides and accidents, young people leaving the country areas, problems with visas and where that is headed.
So this book, Who's Minding the Farm, that I just wrote, was born out of the labour crisis. I just thought, I've moved into the horticultural sector and I can't get labour. And I write about all the different ways I've been able to get labour, including a local guy in the township of Gundy set up a contract working team. He put a thing out on Facebook, and I had lots of local people turn up and say, oh, great work.
And who were these people? One was a bird breeder up the road. Another one wanted some extra work because she was planning her wedding. A guy who was still at school. Another one who was a bartender at the RSL club. All on casual work, all desperately looking for work. So their standard wage is about $25 an hour that a casual worker gets. And so we were able to pull in teams. Then you couldn't, they weren't always available. And in garlic, when you're planting or weeding or harvesting, it's not regular work. You need a lot, and sometimes we get as many as 20 doing tasks. So there was that, but we hooked into the willing workers on organic farms. And this was a wonderful system. And these workers were originally able to get part of their second working visa by doing their volunteer work. And then someone in some government office decided that it was absolutely outrageous that they were not paying tax, and they were somehow conflicting. And so that changed, and now it's backpackers. And a lot of us who used to use woofers as labour were very upset about backpackers because it's a lot more paperwork when you've got to do super and everything and have them in your working system. So for small farmers, backpackers, I still use them, but they're quite challenging.
Do we need an overhaul of the visas?
Yeah, we do. And really, why would you kill a very good system, which was almost a cultural exchange?
Yeah.
We found that just even they would enjoy if you had a German and a Swedish and a Chinese, etc., Japanese all together working on a crop. They found it interesting, and as part of a cultural exchange that was going on in the rural sectors. And some of the local people said, "Oh, I used to love working there because I met all these people from all these places." The best being Greenland, when I had a person coming from Greenland.
What an experience for them too, I guess.
Well, it was interesting for us because she ate no vegetables ever.
Wow.
Yeah, they don't eat vegetables. She said her father never eaten a vegetable. It was all animal fat, blubber and animal fat and everything.
So, well, on that, I wonder, so much emphasis is put on medical cures and we're living longer and longer and longer. Can that become an excuse for us not focusing properly on what we should eat? At one end, we're living longer, we're healthy for longer, 70 is the new 50.
Well, food is medicine to me. And even though I grew up Catholic and I think there can be a lot of guilt surrounded by a lot of personal decisions, I never, no matter what you eat, I just think we have to be relaxed. One of my best stories, someone saying, "Oh, I really want to eat organic food. I really want to be good and eat and give my children organic food, but I can't do it. It's too expensive." But she has just told me that she has made the conversion to 100% organic food, and the one thing that she thinks she's done is she's stopped wasting food because it's expensive. And I'm buying 3 apples. I'm not buying 6. And it's really had an impact, and it's not cost her more money.
When it says organic, can we trust that it is organic?
Well, I'd say yes, but saying that, the best thing is to have a relationship with people. That's why markets are still nice things. And also, a communication with your vegetable provider. Even, I think, the staff at supermarkets, when I do go to supermarkets and buy, I'm always talking to the people putting them on the shelf.
What about the supply chains between organic and non-organic?
They're pretty tough. I'm not worried about that. I'm much more worried about chemical users fudging the dates and when they apply the chemicals going into the market. I worry about that much more.
Okay, just pause there. Can I ask you about organic in this sense, Raj? Is there an equity issue here?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think that, first of all, one of the best reasons to go organic is because you care for workers, right? There's, in one study in California, workers who were exposed to the kinds of pesticides that are normal in strawberries had children whose IQ was 7 points lower.
Whoa.
And all that so we can have cheap strawberries whenever we like with these perfect these sort of geometry project shapes in stores. And it seems to me that I don't want to participate in that. So I think that insofar as organic is tremendously important, and it's tremendously important for our bodies, but that's not the main reason to do it, because comparatively we're exposed to far fewer pesticides than the workers who are doing this every day. So there's a justice issue there. But then there is this issue of, well, look, it's so bloody expensive.
Yeah.
And who can afford to do that? And that, it seems to me, is the other side of the equation that we talk about very rarely in the food system. That it's all well and good for us to demand everyone eat kale and and have a nice Chianti, but we're much less prepared to say, well, look, actually, we need to be paying farm workers more, and then we need to be paying farmers more, and then we need to be paying food service workers more.
I must say I'm excited that you put kale and Chianti in the same phrase. Patrice, many chemicals once deemed safe have now been reclassified as high risk. Do we understand the amount of chemicals being used now?
No, definitely not. There's a weird view somehow that we're all getting more efficient, and there's conservation agriculture terms that get used in agriculture which are very deceitful. Conservation agriculture is chemical agriculture, and as agriculture has progressed, more chemicals are used. During this recent trip this week, when I went into a big sheep farm, bucket and containers of chemical, and it's interesting, right there for everybody in this field trip to see. And I would have thought, wouldn't that be really embarrassing, having all these empty chemical containers, laid up? And went over glyphosate and 2,4-D, the sister to 2,4-T, Vietnam Agent Orange, and that was just normal. It is so normalised now to use chemicals that it's to be anti-chemicals is to still really be quite going back to supporting a peasant-style agriculture, and we're modern, and we're doing it in a modern way.
That ties into what you talk about as food fraud, in a sense, and you said that food fraud is almost as big an issue as fake news. Give me an example, just a quick one.
Well, fake honey, the latest one that's been upsetting everyone. You think, how could that possibly happen? Well, if beekeepers in China feed their bees honey all the time, they get honey syrup, which can look like honey, have a texture of honey, to be blended. These things happen. We know from the Australian olive industry that tested olive oils in Australia that a lot of the olive oils were not even olive oil, they were vegetable oil. And so these things roll on. When we complain to the supermarkets, obviously, they've just sold tons of the stuff, and they've mentioned it to their supplier. I'm sorry about that. It just sort of rolls on, because most things in the food sector are voluntary. There's a lot of voluntary oversight everywhere.
We're talking about ethics, and Raj, the corporate influence here is huge, and you touched on that. But how do you see the real impact of the big corporates controlling the food chain, but also the messaging around that food chain?
Well, that's it. I mean, the marketing of the dross that passes for the standard American diet is permanent, right? The fact that they are able to shape what it is that, with for example, that crazy cheeseburger, to be able to sort of articulate the idea of what it is to be a good American next to the idea of this strange monstrosity food. It's an example of how it is that they're able to wield a great deal of influence, not just in politics, but in culture as well.
But hasn't that always been the case? I remember eating cereal as a kid because Mum and Dad said it was good for you. You look at the back of the packet and whoa.
But that's it. I mean, how is it that Mum and Dad thought it was good for you? The food industry has been not quite in cahoots with the nutrition industry, but for a while, you see, if you go to the American Nutrition Association, who is it that's sponsoring it? You see Coke and Pepsi, and you see Danone, and you see these large industries shaping how it is that we think about our bodily health.
Are you optimistic now that the use of blockchain, IBM announcing in the last couple of days, some big corporates saying they will be able to trace food from the soil to the plate? Is that a good thing, or is there something there I'm not understanding?
Well, so congratulations, you get to see garlic from farm to fork, but that's not stopping the most egregious excesses of the food industry at all. It's just it's making you feel good about that you know where this thing comes from. Whereas if you have a relationship with a garlic farmer, you can ask questions. Blockchain doesn't answer questions. A blockchain doesn't assure you that workers are paid well. Blockchain doesn't. All you have is a traceability that there was a sort of thumbprint on it.
And it's not looking out for our health either.
Raj, offline you said to me this, which just hits me. You say, it's easier for people to imagine the end of the planet than to imagine the end of capitalism. Do you really think that?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a sort of the bumper sticker from the British cultural critic Frederick Jameson. But yeah, look, we're surrounded every day with what the apocalypse will look like. You know, turn on the telly, it's zombies, or it's Mad Max, or it's whatever sort of untimely end we will meet. You see it. But where do you see communities of people who care for one another? Where do you see communities where, in fact, instead of prioritizing profit, we're looking out for one another and growing things together and moving away from this extractive economy into one that's about caring and repairing? You don't see that. And it's really hard for us to believe that it's possible. I mean, that's part of why I did this documentary, is to show here are some people doing it, and here's some people in the United States doing it, and there are people doing it. So you wouldn't believe it if you didn't see it.
So what's the impetus for that happening in a community here and here and here in different countries? What needs to happen for that to occur?
I mean, a couple of things. One, you need to believe that you're more powerful than you have been told. And I think that's one of the important things about the activism in the food system. It says, we are powerful. And then you have to organize. And I think that's not something that we're used to. I mean, in democracy, we're used to voting and thinking that was it. But in fact, it's the organizing process that keeps democracy alive. And many of us have forgotten what that feels like.
Although in Australia with our food system, 70% of what we produce is exported. So every single one of us can be perfect, right? It's not enough. It's not enough, because the damage has been done in the landscape of the nation with the water and the soil and the air in the agricultural sector, and that's for export. So the politics of agriculture overrides, I think, is more significant than each individual person being perfect in their dietary decisions.
Yeah. Thank you for your questions. Remember, #integrity20 if you would like to post one. What is the best possible diet is one of the questions.
Oh.
Patrice, do you want to answer that?
Every person has their own individual perfect diet. That's for the individual to work out. I mean, I don't know.
But in terms of health?
Obviously,
fresh. You're saying organic, you're saying...
Fresh.
Yes.
I say organic because it's not that you're getting a market improvement. It's a crazy thing, the fact that organic food is more expensive, because it should be completely the other way around. You know, using all these highly toxic chemicals, polluting the soil and the water. You want that? You want to pay extra, really. It's the organic people that it should be cheaper.
And I mean, in terms of the best diet for health, there was a report earlier on this year, the Eat Lancet report, that says, well, what do we all have to do so that everyone gets to eat well? And the answer was to have what looks like a Mediterranean diet. It has much, much, much less meat than we're used to. And it is about fresh, local, sustainable, seasonal. And it is possible for the entire planet to eat this. If we make the right kind of political choices, but also if we stop, as you say, the conventional agriculture from laying waste to the planet.
One interesting thing, there's 25 million head of cattle walking around Australia now, right? Same number as humans. The grass lands where the animals are born and grow up to 9 months old before they go onto the feedlots. It's the absolute increase in the feedlot sector in Australia that I think is seriously bad and must stop. We cannot afford to have a bigger cattle sector. It's now just where we are the birthing centre, the grass feeders are the birthing centre for the feedlot industry. And that, all the animal issues, the animal justice issues, the reason I think that's driving all the pea proteins as opposed to the meat proteins. So to me, Australians have to say, do we want to have more than 25 million head of cattle walking around Australia drinking our water for export, right? Remember, they're mostly being exported.
We won't stop you eating meat though, will we?
No, I'm a keen omnivore, but I eat our meat.
Yes.
Meat we grow on the farm.
What about the slow food movement? Thank you. Will it become the norm at any point? Who wants to take that one?
Be good if it did.
I mean, I love the slow food. I mean, if you're not familiar with it, you know, it's a sort of circle jerk of olive oil fanciers and red wine fetishists. But
Got us all
not everywhere, and certainly in its inception, it was set up as a way of democratizing pleasure. You know, these are Italians who are to the left of the Communist Party, because the Communist Party just wants people to eat borscht. So in Italy, these Italian sort of anarcho-communists say, look, what we need to do is address the two things that stop people eating well. You need more time and you need more money. How do we do that? Well, we unionize to increase wages and we demand a 2-hour lunch break. And that way, you have more time and you have more money. And that democratic approach to pleasure brings together everything I love. You know, it's sensualist and it's Italians enjoying this delicious food, but also making the political action happen so that we can afford it and we have the time to enjoy it.
Well, the great act of slow food manifest in a political decision was, I've just come back from Paris, where my daughter lives, where the government gives everybody a food certificate so that you can go and have a 2-course lunch in all the bistros. And the bistros are full of people nicking in, having a 45, a 1 hour, wonderful chit-chat, the great conviviality at lunch break, because it was regarded as a negative thing for people to be eating at their desk. It was antisocial, it was bad for your health, and it did not instill great friendship and conviviality. So it's a political decision.
Fantastic.
So the slow food movement has been around for quite a long time, as has the organic market, as has various other things, some more faddish than that. We're looking to the future of food. Can you see what is likely? We teach our children, for example, now that to have something on your plate that is red and green and purple, more insects perhaps as a protein booster, or what do you think we might start considering?
Well, insects are okay to eat. Lots of cultures eat insects. That's no bad thing. For me, maybe I should stop. Raj,
No. Please, we'll go to Raj in a moment. But what are you thinking?
I think if we destroy the soil of the nation, if we keep going on and making out, we can just keep doing the same thing, then laboratory food, I think, is inevitable. Because, and there's a lot of soil scientists now that I talk to say, you know, we just have to give the land a rest. Let's just move to the lab, give the land a rest, and then we can go back. And I remember the first time it said it to me, I thought, you know, I can get that. You know, most of us are taking vitamins, you know, occasionally, time to time, to fill in the gaps. And I can see the lab becoming more important to giving us the nutrition that we need if we keep going the way we're going.
That's actually the opposite of the slow food movement, the enjoyment that you've been talking about, isn't it?
Yes, but that's it. I mean, you know, if we carry on with business as usual, the guess is that there are 60 harvests left on Earth, and that's not, you know. So, one shudders to think what happens after that. But that's why I think it's important to have the optimistic moment of recognizing that more and more people are very aware of quite how parlous the state of our soil and our planet is. And so we are faced with the choices of, you know, more lab-grown meat for those who can afford it, right? I mean, bear in mind that we're talking about food access in a time where there are nearly 1 billion people who are starving because of poverty, and these inequalities are just made worse by climate change. I mean, even in the United States, we have 40 million people who are food insecure, and that number is going to get worse if we carry on with business as usual.
And it's much worse when you think the agriculture sector needs to sequester the carbon as a part of our climate change solutions. So we've got soil we're trashing, we've got water that we're mismanaging, we're polluting air in the course of those bad activities as well. And then we want the agriculture sector, we really should be demanding of the agriculture sector that they're building their soil and sequestering the carbon, as well as being, leading the way with social justice and being able to provide more food. So that's why I think the lab in the future will become more significant.
Thanks, Emmy, for your question. In countries like Mongolia with extreme temperatures and no access to fresh crops, the people rely on a meat-heavy diet but use almost all of the animal. What does organic and sustainable food look like in these countries?
Well, doesn't it look like that? I mean, it looks exactly like that system, which is about, it is heavy in animal protein and fat and fermented yak milk.
But no waste.
Exactly.
Less processed.
It's been sustainable that way for a very long time.
What about labour? Do they do that differently there than in?
As far as I understand it, that is a diet that's associated with a nomadic lifestyle. And it is the people who are engaged in animal husbandry are also eating that way.
Or participatory.
Yeah. What about sugar? And we knew this would come up. But, we're hearing that sugar is the new tobacco. Could we genuinely see big legal claims against big sugar manufacturers into the future?
That's interesting. I mean, in the United States, it's becoming very clear that in the 1970s, the sugar industry bought off a number of scientists in government and in the academy, so that the sort of toxic effects of eating too much sugar were laid underneath the more pressing concerns around fat intake. I think it's going to be very interesting when the whistleblowers come forward around what exactly what the sugar industry knew and when about the impacts on human health. So watch this space.
Do you practice what you preach?
No, I mean, look, here I am. I just flew to Australia for a day. I'm a hypocrite, but I'm also trying to work towards a world where that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm vegetarian, but that says nothing to getting on a plane and coming to Australia and buggering off again.
Yeah.
I want to recognize that hypocrisy in myself and try and flay it out in the same way that, look, patriarchy is something that I will struggle with for the rest of my life because I've been born in a society that's patriarchal. And my job is to die fighting it and making sure that my son and my daughter don't live in that kind of world.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's the fight.
So what can we learn from other countries into the future? What's happening in China, or Israel has set up a couple of those technology labs, I understand. Is there a country doing this in a better way that we should turn our attention to?
There are lots of really good little stories everywhere, I think.
Give me one.
Well, the latest one I just heard was new systems of making compost, so compost is important to build soil, but distributing it, and depending on how you grow it, like making it more business as opposed to more just domestic garden, making compost where it's really high carbon and stable carbon, and I think that can be rolled out on a lot of vegetable farms, and that's a good thing. So those sorts of stories. In our neck of the woods, we're hooking into trying to have mobile abattoirs. There's been a lot of legislative restrictions in that, where people who want to eat meat are just able to eat it directly, knowing the person who grows the meat, maybe witness even killing the meat, because if you're going to eat meat, you've got to confront the reality of what you're doing and appreciate what it is more if you are going to go down that road. As a farmer on a biodynamic farm who partakes in using holistic management systems, animals can help build soil when it's done correctly. That's another thing. Animals can be used to an advantage of managing grassland. I think there are a lot of good people doing things. But when you drive around the nation, it's sort of hard to see. You don't often see people out in the field. And if you don't really know about agriculture, it's hard to know what's really going on.
The way Patrice is painting it, Raj, is it's like so many of our industries. There's all these pillars doing different things where we need a community approach. We need to come together and not actually see it as a food problem, but maybe a societal problem.
Well, that's why I like the Green New Deal, right? I mean, because it's about justice, and the more people learn about the Green New Deal, the more they like it. The more that it's about good, decent healthcare, and it's about communities that sustain one another, and about time to spend with your family and your friends, and to eat well. That's something that feels good. But again, it's the separation of these things into these silos that has always been the sort of weapon of the powerful against the weak, right? Yeah. We get pitted against each other along lines of gender or race or of history, where in fact the most thing that we have in common is our humanity and often our being set upon by a bunch of elites.
Where can we find out more information about the Green New Deal?
The Google. So, I mean, it's a process that's ongoing. So, but Googling the Green New Deal will give you the US text of it. But I don't know enough about whether it's happening in Australia. Maybe someone in the audience does.
If you do, please send it to me via Twitter, #integrity20, and I'll share that. We talked about blockchain, but are we underestimating the role of technology in the future of food going forward?
Well,
whether it's AI, whether it's drones, cameras.
We're always talking, aren't we? Technology is going to save us, but we are where we are today because of technology. Technology hasn't saved us. It's not a new machine that's going to give us an answer. It's our attitude. It's our attitude to what we do. So we just have to. That's why it's been upsetting for me deeply that the climate change agricultural system debate hasn't got more, because if we could really believe or understand that we could be the solution, we'd be so much more excited and really engaged in what could be the best thing to happen for Australian agriculture. But it's same old, poor farmer, doing it tough, needs more money. And also a lot of people who just want to help a farmer, just sort of continue doing the same thing. Whereas really, I think that it's probably not helped us very much.
We have 62 rural or remote federal electorates in this country. Is this a failure, what you're talking about, a failure at the political level, or is it a failure of us, a failure
It's very hard for a politician to be tough to farmers. I live in National Party heartland. I'm surrounded by, all my neighbours. They're on the National Party committees. I'm mates with these people, but it is a very, as I said, it's a very conservative point of view that's embedded in this powerful tradition that we can't break. They are so proud of our tradition, despite where it's got us.
So we're looking back, not forward.
Yeah, it's always going back. Even at all our drought meetings, everybody talks about my grandpa, my grandma. It's always backward.
Thanks, John, for your question. Is population growth simply outstripping food resources? Are there simply too many people rather than not enough food?
No. I think 25 million head of cattle, a cow's bigger than us. Just think of that in terms of using natural resources. I never want it. I get very upset people talking about population control.
Right, because there's a population of people and there's a population of stuff. Right?
Yeah.
And if you want to have a lower per person footprint in the world, we need to cull Americans and Australians. But it's never represented that way. The population debate is always about sort of fecund brown people. And that's not,
Hey, who's clapping? He also said Australians.
and people's size, the fact that, food is so unequally consumed.
We're almost out of time, but can I ask you, perhaps a silly question, but how might things taste like into the future?
Oh.
Can you give us...
You mean if we haven't destroyed our taste buds with all the sugar?
We're talking about what things look like and where they come from. Is there an impact there then on taste?
Well, just because we might be interested in food and enjoy diversity of fruit and veg, I think it's wrong to think that most people have to be that excited about taste. I think a lot of people just want a quick meal, and that's okay too.
But I do think it's about the society we choose. I mean, if we want to take the time to build friendships and love and care for one another and share over a meal, then food's going to taste better. I mean, think of your favourite meal. It wasn't something you ate alone.
Yeah.
And your favourite meal, so in the future, we have choices about whether we eat singularly in our cars or whether we eat together as a better society.
Just briefly, give us a point of optimism. What are you optimistic about with the future of food? And then there was silence.
Green New Deal.
Yeah. Green New Deal, it's on the Google. Patrice?
Well, I'm optimistic about people. I think our capacity is huge. We're just a bit slow on the uptake when it comes to good agriculture.
So let's end there. And can I ask you, in 3 weeks when we wake up or when we leave here, what is the one thing you want us to remember in your message, or the one thing that you both would like us to change
Oh, well, mine's the commitment to food waste. It's personal, and as I said, calling it out, just seeing it, witnessing it, feeling it, commenting on it, and not doing it. Because it's easy for us in our affluent world to be profligate, and we've got to not be profligate.
Can I just ask for an honest show of hands, who could do more in their own lives in relation to food waste? Almost 100%, fantastic. And we started with you, Raj. Can we end? Last word?
I think, look, all of this feels overwhelming. Climate change, patriarchy, racism, history of colonialism, blah, blah, blah. But we can do it. And I think the thing to remember 3 weeks from now is that it has been done before and it can be done again. And that you can do it. You are more powerful than you've been led to believe.
Ladies and gentlemen, a big thank you to Patrice and Raj.